Good morning. Good Friday morning, everybody. And you know me, I like those quirky little national holidays and wonder why we celebrate them. So if you didn't know it, happy Moldy Cheese Day, because that's what today is, Moldy Cheese Day. All right. So this was completely unplanned. I had no intention of doing this morning as a Friday morning. But I got up this morning and I started doing my normal reading, my normal listening to podcasts, and I ran across two that just hit me like a ton of bricks. Okay, so here's one of them. I read this article on Bloomberg right here, how the 50 richest Americans are worth as much as the bottom 165 million people. So the 50 richest people in America, they have more money than the bottom 165 million people. How does that happen? Okay, and I'm not against people being rich, but how does that happen? Okay, the other one, then I started listening to my podcast and look at what's in the Wall Street Journal, Your Money Briefing this morning. Okay, the wealthiest Americans recovered their pandemic losses. All right, so in this pandemic, somehow the wealthiest people have figured out not only how to recover from it, they've already recovered since March, but they've actually gotten richer out of this pandemic. Okay, and again, I'm not against people being wealthy, all right, but I want to know how it works, right? And I want you to know how it works. Okay, so I'm coming in, I'd done that, and I was thinking about it, got my wheels turning. And I was like, I'm a little bummed still this week about losing the passing of Eddie Van Halen. Van Halen was a big group in my young life, and but I'm getting pumped up because I'm listening to some live Van Halen music in my car, and I was like, man, I gotta talk about this. We got to talk about this, and I can't wait till Monday, right? I'm not going to wait till class. So that's where this came out of. Okay, so we're going to use what I'd like to do is talk about these articles, talk about how this happens. Remember, in week 2, we talked about, I showed you some videos on wealth inequality and income inequality and how that's the world you're growing into. You're going to graduate into this world where there's the haves and the have-nots, okay? And how do you learn something in this class to help you navigate in that world, all right? And so I want you in this class, guys, my 121 students, my family, right? I want you to be able to do more than regurgitate definitions to me. I don't want you to be able to tell me what income definition is or what's the definition of net worth. Anybody with a heartbeat can Google that and find me a definition. And employers don't pay employees to look stuff up on Google because they can do it themselves. Okay, your productivity, your ability to earn a paycheck, the employer, they want to pay people who think, right? Critically think about topics. Apply the information that they know to make decisions, okay? And that's where I want to lead you guys. This is more than just a multiple choice test. It's more than just taking a true-false test saying I got 100 on it, right? This stuff matters, okay? And so what I'd like to do this morning is take these two, the podcast and the article I read this morning, and maybe break it down a little bit using this model that I started to introduce you to last week, okay? And let's look at it and see how that occurs. And then you can start to take that information and go, well, how do I apply that to my own life when I get out there? All right. Okay, so that's where we're headed. So let's start breaking this down. Let me take one more swig of my Panera coffee juice here. Black coffee. All right, here we go. Over on this side, I hope you can see this okay. All right. But you see our model, right? You've seen this a couple times now in the video. This is our income block. And we compare that to expense. We call that cash flow, right? It's our budget process. We're comparing income and expenses, all right, to see whether we have a surplus, a deficit, or a balanced budget, okay? Over here, we've got assets. You learned about this last week. And liabilities, your debt, okay? And if we compare those two, you're learning this week. If we take assets and subtract the liabilities, we get what's called net worth, which is a measurement or the score, the game score. You'll hear me introduce that. The comparison here is your net worth. You can have a positive net worth or a negative net worth. All right. So that's the layout. So over here on this side, you see our model. This is what I kind of have drawn up as maybe the average typical American. All right. They're out there working hard. They're making some money. They're maybe spending just as much as they make, maybe saving a little bit. I've got it shown. So there's just a fraction there of surplus. So they're maybe saving as much as they can. Okay, so they don't have a huge surplus. They're getting by. They have some assets over here, but they've got just as much debt. The average American has credit card debt. They have car debt. They have student loan debt. They have a mortgage on their house they're paying off, right? So we have a lot of debt in this country, Okay, so this is the average American. Well, what happened when the pandemic hit, guys? What was the big thing that occurred? It didn't happen to everybody, okay, but it happened to some. It happened to actually close to 30 million people. They lost their job, folks. They lost their job. They became unemployed. So what happened to this income, guys? It disappeared. And they were probably living off just what? Government subsidization, right? Unemployment benefits. Okay, so look what happened. They went from barely having a slight surplus to what? Having a huge deficit. Where are they going to get the money to live when they don't have a job? Okay, so what happens here? This money has to come from somewhere. And so these people started digging into their savings accounts, taking the money out. If they had an emergency fund, they started using it. If they had some 401k retirement accounts, maybe they said, I need the money now. And they started withdrawing the money from their retirement accounts, which isn't necessarily the best thing, but I understand why people would do it. Okay. And so what happens if they're pulling this money out of their assets, out of their accounts? What's happening to their assets, guys? Their assets are depleting, right? They're eating up all their savings because they're trying to survive. Okay. Maybe even if they don't even have enough assets, what do? They start to go out and use a credit card. Again, they're just trying to get by. They're trying to survive in this moment. But if they're doing that, what's happening to their debt levels? Their debt levels are going through the roof. It's growing. So what used to be a small surplus over here in income and a small net worth originally over here has been completely flipped on its head by this pandemic. They lost their job. They're running a huge deficit. To survive that deficit, they start to chip away at their savings and maybe even start to borrow and use credit cards to get by. And now they have this huge problem, right? They are becoming less wealthy. This is what they say during the pandemic. The poor are getting worse off. The lower end of the socioeconomic stratum, they're not improving. They're getting worse during this, okay? But they say the rich are getting better off. How is that possible, okay? So over here, I've got the wealthy represented. Pretty decent income, right? They're probably, most of them are probably spend less than they make because they're pretty darn smart with their money, okay? So they're running a big surplus here, this distance here. What are they doing with that surplus? Well, they're buying a lot of assets, stocks, bonds. They're in the stock market, right? And those stocks, what has happened? Well, initially in March, guys, we haven't talked about this, but the stock market crashed. It went down significantly, decreased significantly in March, right? When the pandemic first came out and the economy shut down. And so initially, the value of these rich folks' assets went down, right? It took a huge hit because their stocks and their investment assets decreased, right, in value. But since then, they've all come back, okay? They've come back. This person over here probably didn't have much stocks. They just had money in a savings account. The stock market didn't affect them. Most Americans, half of Americans, don't even own stock, right? So the stock market didn't affect these people. But over here, it hit them hard initially, but now it's come right back. So it came down, okay? And then they waited it out, and their investments did what? Came back in a big way. Now they're back. They're doing all right. They're not. These folks are getting richer. This distance right here, guys, their net worth, their wealth, they're becoming more wealthy during the pandemic. Now that the stock market has recovered because they own appreciating assets like real estate investments, stocks, bonds, they're doing okay. They're doing pretty darn well, and they're getting richer and richer and richer. These average Americans over here that were just getting by earlier and had all their assets predominantly in their house that they live in, and they're in the cash essentially, might have had something affect their income. They've had to deplete their assets and maybe take on more debt, and they're becoming less and less wealthy. The distance between the poor and the rich is getting worse. It's getting exacerbated by this pandemic. And that's what those two things that I read and listened to this morning, that's what it's trying to say. And you can see it right here. And it's all because of what? It's really all about the assets, folks. It's all about the assets. These folks, not bad folks, right? Hardworking people, right? But if they had all their money in the house they live in, well, they can't get rid of the house they live in. If most of their asset was a house and some cash, they've already eaten through it. Why are these people doing a whole heck of a lot better? Because they bought assets before the pandemic. They had appreciating assets that were growing in the stock market. They had real estate that was appreciating in value. They might have had real estate homes that people were renting and paying them more income. So even if they did have an income hit, it's okay. They had the rental income to live off of that was feeding, their assets were feeding their income. It all has to do with appreciating assets. That's why I'm harping right now on assets and return and rate of return and how do you buy things that make you more wealthy, because this is what's enabled some people to survive this pandemic and some people are struggling mightily. And again, good people. But I want you to be on this side. If it ever happens again, I want you over here. And if you're listening just a little bit this morning, what's the difference? Buy assets early, invest early, save early, be the $8 million janitor. Let that money build and build and build. And when there is a problem, an economic issue that comes on, like a pandemic that shuts down the economy and may hurt your job a little bit, you're gonna be okay. All right, so thank you for your time this morning. Again, unplanned, completely unplanned, had no intention of doing that. But I think it's too important, guys, not to talk about this in this moment in time, in this particular course. I want you to build your assets so that you're wealthy enough that you're not affected. You don't lose sleep in moments like this. Again, great people over here. I know some of these people, right? They work hard, right? And they try to do the right thing. But they could be better off if they had built up some assets, taken some risks with their money. And that's what I'm trying to open your eyes to so that you end up here in your life, not necessarily over here and hurting in moments like this. And as the rich gets richer, I want you to be on that side. Not that it's all about money, but I want you to be independent. I want you to be unaffected by events like this. Okay? So that you can then, if you're over here, you have the ability then what? Use your wealth to help these people over here. Okay, as a community, we begin to help each other out. Okay, help other people get by. All right, so happy Friday, happy Moldy Cheese Day. Cheers if you're drinking your coffee or your juice this morning. I hope you have a great weekend. Be safe, find a way to have some fun, and we'll see you back next week.